Hello and welcome to today's First Up Talk. Today we're going to hear from Katie Holly, who's the Managing Director of Live Films. And so after Katie talks, we'll have some time for Q&A, and I look forward to the talk.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay? Is this mic working? Yeah? Good. Thank you, Mary, for... You don't? Oh, okay, it's not you. Thank you, Mary, for inviting me along. Yes, will say up front, I'm definitely a little bit nervous, but it's good to see some friends and family here with smiles. I am Managing Director and Producer at Blinder Films, and that company's been going since about 2006. But today, I guess I'm going to talk about my path, both kind of in study and professionally, and how I got to this point, and then hopefully, if there's time, a little bit specifically about 3 projects that I feel like were kind of turning points for me and for the company, and then maybe some ideas for the future. But before that, I guess I just wanted to say up front that I feel really lucky to do the job that I do. I get to work facilitating and enabling creative people to fulfill their visions and also contribute to developing their visions. Hi. Michael McDermott, my housemate, who's never on time. It's a really special and fun job. It's incredibly hard work, but it's also really fun. You get to travel and meet a lot of amazing people, so I feel really lucky. I think I always loved movies. I never really had a thought that might be a job that I would end up working in, but I certainly used to love stories in any form. I used to read voraciously and watch movies voraciously. And these 3 films I just put up as a slide to kind of give you a sense of why I love them. And I suppose that is because I feel like movies have the power to connect people, to provoke people, to entertain people, and to move them. The Champ, which is the film on the bottom right, is probably the first film that I ever remember seeing and being so petrified for like poor little Ricky and so sad. And then In the Name of the Father, I remember watching and coming out. I think I saw it in the Savoy or maybe the Lighthouse on Abbey Street, and coming out of the cinema and just not knowing what to do with myself because I was just so angry about the story that I had seen. And then Almost Famous is the top film. And that's just my comfort blanket. That's the film that I will watch if I'm in a bad mood. I can watch it over and over again, recite it, and I really love it. And I wonder if maybe one of the reasons that I love it is because it's a story of a guy who loved music and wants to be a music journalist. And actually that was Cameron Crowe, who's the writer and director of that film story. Because when I started, I thought maybe I wanted to be a writer, and particularly I thought maybe I wanted to be a writer about music. I don't want to leave up this slide very long because it's really embarrassing, because this was whenever I was attempting to be a writer and thought that what you did was like use 3 words when one would do. Also, it talks about my overly concerned and slightly irritating mother, which is a line that still burns me, and I'm so sorry. But anyway, so what happened was I was in school and Kurt Cobain committed suicide, and obviously this was a seismic event if you were my age at that time, and Hot Press put a call out for people to send in their writings about their upset, I guess, on this. And so I wrote something, and very heartfelt, and then a week later got in the post the Hot Press, and my piece had been published in the top right hand corner, and I was really excited and thrilled, and quickly probably forgot about Kurt Cobain's death, and then continued a dialogue with Hot Press, which led to me going to do some work experience there. And that was great and eye-opening, even though I think I was very kind of meek and mild and just taking everything in. But I realized through that time and being asked to kind of do some reviews of work that I just didn't think that kind of critiquing or writing about stuff was for me, and that hopefully in whatever field that I eventually worked in, that maybe I could be more involved in the creation of work. So I went to college, and I went from being in school and doing well academically, being in a really small class of like 30 people, all girls, to coming here to Trinity, and I chose to study English and history, which was amazing, but it was also a time when I remember being incredibly intimidated, because I came in and there was a lot of particularly English students who would come to choose to study in Trinity, and they knew who Derrida was and Foucault. I had the first idea. I'd never even heard, I just didn't even know what critical theory was. They had read Chaucer, and so I think actually my time in Trinity was a time where I studied really hard, but I didn't feel like I was necessarily thriving or that I was top of my class, which is maybe what I've been used to. But it was a time which also I spent a lot of time kind of learning about stuff that I liked. So learning about new music, making a lot of new friends, traveling a lot. And so I didn't really involve myself as I had in school with like societies or anything like that. But I actually kind of don't regret at all the time that I spent here. Anyway, when I finished in Trinity, I was still not really sure what I wanted to do. And I think we were probably really lucky, like at that time, because it was the start of the Celtic Tiger, which meant that there wasn't really this kind of concern or pressure over getting a job. It never really seemed to concern us in the way that maybe I know that it had done for generations before ours. And so I decided to go traveling for a year. I did a TEFL course and then I went off to Mexico and stayed for about 4 months and then came back and still really wasn't sure what I wanted to do. But I was talking to my friend Sinead one day and she was like, well, I've just applied for this master's in film production. And I was like, well, that sounds really good. Okay, maybe I'll do that. And so I applied for her master's, which is in DIT, but unfortunately I was too late. I missed the deadline, but I saw that there was another master's in film studies in UCD and I was like, okay, that sounds great. I'll go and do that. And so I went to UCD for a year and that was amazing because it was literally a year of immersing myself in films from different eras and genres and countries that I never probably would have seen otherwise. And so it was mostly film studies, but there was 2 production modules on that course. That was basically what they did was said, they got us to write the scripts and effectively produce them, but then they brought in a professional crew to do the proper work that we really didn't have a clue how to do. But I kind of, I suppose, found myself naturally gravitating towards the producing side on both of those films, neither of which will ever see the light of day because they weren't very good, but it was an amazing learning experience. And I suppose for the first time it like coalesced for me that producing is like the perfect marriage of all the things that I love, which are music and stories and visuals, and then also this kind of business side. My mum and dad were business people, they worked in retail, and I have a really vivid memory when they set up a shop in Wicklow town and we all moved there and having like 2 days where we were like stocking the shop, and just that kind of feeling of building a business was something that definitely made an impression on me, I would say. So anyway, I finished the master's. I was like, I don't know anyone who works in film, so what do I do? And I spoke to the guy who was the director on the course, and he said, just here's some names of production companies, send out your CV. And so I was really, really lucky the week that I sent out my letter, because Screen Training Ireland, which is this training program in Ireland for film makers, film students and professionals, they were running a course called the Development Executive Traineeship, I think it was. And it happened to be taking place about 3 weeks after I sent out my letter. And so all the women who tended to work in the main production companies in Dublin doing their kind of office admin and all their reading all seemed to be taking the same week off. So I got calls from like 3 companies and they were like, can you come and fill in for a week? And I was like, God, this is really easy. Anyway, so I said, okay, I'm going to go work. There was a company called Treasure, and they'd made a film called I Went Down that was in Sundance. And they were like, will you come in and fill in for a week? So I did that. And I joined, this is the one, sorry. I joined Treasure. And the first job that I had there was on Ape, which is this film on the top left-hand side. It was a 26-minute claymation animation directed by Rory Bresnahan. And Treasure had this idea they wanted to set up an animation studio. So it was in Rochford Bridge in Westmeath that they had this little studio and they had people working down there, and it was going to take, because claymation is incredibly slow, so it's literally 1 minute a week, so it was going to take 26 weeks to make this thing. So after my week in Dublin, they said, you have a brain, do you have a car? I was like, yeah, I've got a car. They were like, brilliant, okay, do you want to work on Ape with us? So I became the production coordinator on this show, which kind of meant that I was in charge of keeping across the schedule and making sure that the production ran smoothly, and like that would like extend to going and buying Play-Doh and bringing it to the artists, or keeping things on track schedule wise, keeping the financiers in the loop, liaising with the edit house. Anyway, I learned an awful lot. It was a great time, and then whenever that was finishing up, I was lucky enough in that the girl who had been working in the office had decided it was time for her to move on. So then they asked, would I stay and work in the company? And effectively, I suppose that was then me becoming like an office manager slash producer's assistant slash, development person. I ended up staying there for about 4 years in that role. Across that time, we made Man About Dog and The Mighty Celt. And when I kind of finished up, we were just going into production on a film called Shrooms, which did really well for them as a kind of a cult classic. I was also kind of pursuing my own work as a producer, because obviously that's not what I was doing when I was in Treasure. I was doing a lot of assisting work. So I produced a short film called Podruga Nadia, which was an interesting one, again a big learning curve. And then I also set up my own production company with a friend called Jer Gilroy, called DeBose Productions, so named because that was the street that we'd lived on together in San Francisco. And we made a short film called Call Girl, which was like made for very little money. And I think then we realized that actually running a company was a lot harder work than we had anticipated, so that quickly folded. So that was my first failure as a film producer with my own production company, I would say. But through the time in Treasure, I made it very clear about my ambitions to produce and kind of wanting to learn. And Rob, who was the director there, the owner of the company, co-owner of the company, was incredibly supportive on that. But he himself is like a creative producer, and I think he's amazing at that. He's brilliant with story. He's brilliant with, the production side of things. He's less interested, and I think he would say this himself, in the running of the business or the kind of business side. So for him, I think he was looking for someone who he'd be able to bring in to actually fulfill that role. And so what ended up happening was that he hired in a head of business affairs who came into the company effectively ahead of me, which I completely understand it. It's the right call for him, but it meant that it was a difficult position for me to be in, because I felt I was never really going to move up a level if I remained there. And so I'm going to have to start kind of looking around and see what else might be out there. One of the things I suppose that I was also doing across this time was a lot of courses. I suppose I've learned across my career that networking and support from other people and collaboration with other people are completely essential to success. And I've been incredibly lucky with the people that I've collaborated with across time. And so I did a course called Ayave, which is like a training course for producers, and became very good friends with another young female producer called Virginia Gilbert on that. By the end of us having done the course, because it kind of took place over a year, she had left and decided she was going to be a writer-director, and I had finally left Treasure to join this new thing. And that was Blinder Films. So Blinder is actually an offshoot of no longer running, but it was a commercials production company. So it was Kieran J. Walsh, director, and Richie Smith, director, and another guy called Michael Duffy. And so they had been running this company very successfully for about a year. And then they decided, we would love to set up a film part of the company as well. And so they were looking around for someone who they might be able to bring on board to develop a slate of projects for them to write and direct, but then also for other people. They really wanted to build a company. And so they approached me, and we had a couple of meetings, and I think I very precociously said, okay, I will join, and I'll agree to your terms, and I'll do development and look for projects, but as long as, if this all goes well, at the end of a year, I want to become an equal partner in the company, and I want to produce. So, but thankfully they were like, that sounds good to us. We don't necessarily want to produce, and so that's what happened. And then we set off. And again, I think we were lucky with our timing, because in that year, the film board was at its height in terms of the funding that it was getting from government. There's been quite severe cuts, which are slowly on the rise again, but at that time I think it was getting over 20 million. And so one of the things they decided to do with the money was this scheme called the Multiple Project Development Scheme. Basically what that was a scheme whereby companies could apply and they could get a pot of money for development. So across 2 years, you wouldn't have to keep going to the film board on every single project. You could develop a slate yourselves, and they would also contribute to your overhead for 2 years, up to 50%. So I said, let's apply. I know we're a new company, but we might as well, and luckily we were successful in getting that. And that really that really set us off. You know, it set us up. It meant that we were able to kind of go out and be confident that we had the backing to kind of pursue and commission scripts from writers and projects. And I suppose looking back now, for me, the challenge at that time, and probably my like a little Achilles heel at that time for me, were twofold. The first was I was definitely the least experienced person in that company. You know, I hadn't really produced a lot myself, whereas Kieran had directed several features and many long-running TV shows, and Richie, while he hadn't done drama, had done an awful lot in commercials. So I really was like, okay, well, I need to just really figure out how to make stuff and build the company. And the other thing was probably tied to that is that I felt like it was important that we started getting our name out there, and we needed to make stuff. So we started just saying yes to everything, basically. And this is kind of what happened. We made a lot of different things. We made short films and web series and doc series, even Irish language documentary series. We did comedy singles, we did comedy series, and then features and feature documentaries. So we were doing a lot, and it was a bit too much, I would say. And I think, you know, it took me a while to kind of figure out what our identity was going to be and what we really wanted to prioritize. I mean, part of the reason for pursuing a lot of stuff was, as I said, to get credits, and also because the feature slate on the drama side, it can take a very long time to develop. So it made sense for it to be us to be pursuing other things. But it's just something looking back that I realized if we had maybe been a bit more strategic at the start, as opposed to being very just excited to be doing the thing, we would have gotten to kind of, I suppose, where we are now a little bit sooner. Anyway, the next thing, but features was certainly where we want to be going, and we definitely had some kind of early success in that. These were the first 3 films that we produced. The first one that we shot was 2.5 years after the company was founded. That was 100 Mornings. And that was a great experience. Again, I was probably the least experienced person on set. But I just kind of, you know, one thing maybe I know I am good at is recognizing other people's talents and then letting them do their work. And so I guess that worked out quite well. We got to Slam Dance and we won an award there, and it definitely got notice for Conor Horgan, the director, and ourselves. And we went on to make another couple of features in quite quick succession. One that I'm really proud of, called Come on Eileen, was a co-production written and directed by Finola Garrity, who's a UK writer who came to us because Kieran had known her from film school, I guess. And then also Tom Hall's Sensation, which was Donald Gleason's first leading role. And again, that premiered in Toronto. It was very well reviewed. But all those films, the one thing, I suppose, that slightly stopped us or made us kind of rethink again, the one thing that happened with all those films, unfortunately, was that they weren't that successful in finding an audience, you know, or a substantial enough audience. And I think, you know, that's a really important part of the circle whenever you're producing, is getting it out to people. And certainly we were reaching people and people were responding, but film production is an expensive business, and to sustain and to grow and to get to make, I suppose, bigger level films, I realized, I suppose, that we needed to try and be a bit more strategic when it comes to kind of marketing and partnering and bringing the distribution and sales side of things into clearer focus from an earlier stage. And part of that was informed as well, I have to say, by the television work that we were doing. Again, through a relationship that Kieran had with David McSavage, we ended up making a pilot, and then it went on to making 4 series of The Savage Eye, which I don't know, I guess it was a big cult success in Ireland. And what I really loved about that show, even though it was a very challenging thing to make budget-wise and David McSavage-wise, I think it's fair to say, it was provocative, and it like talked about issues that, you know, that people in the country were angry about, and it really connected with those people. And it was kind of amazing to see the response whenever the TV show was on, whether it was on Twitter or on Facebook, or just walking down the street with Dave McSavage and seeing people shouting at him. You could see that response and engagement was there. And I suppose, you know, as that was happening at the same time, you know, that's quite intoxicating, I guess. So that was something we were certainly very, very conscious of. And then I suppose I would see this as like the next phase in our development. Citadel was probably the first time that I actually felt like, oh, okay, actually the filmmaking side can be a business. That was a film that was written and directed by a guy called Kieran Foy. He had made a couple of short films. One of them was called Fairies of Blackheath Woods, and that was noticed and awarded all across the world. And so he definitely was on a lot of people's radar. And we made the film. I set it up with a company in Scotland called Sigma Films, and we shot it between Glasgow and Ireland in 2010, I think, 2011, and premiered it at South by Southwest in 2012, and had this great company in the US who were the ones charged with selling the film for us. And it was kind of an amazing experience because we had this brilliant premiere, and then suddenly there was like 5 different distributors, including like Adam Yauch's The Beastie Boys, bidding on the film. And you know, they made a really good sale. We did a great international sale, and I was like, okay, well, this is how it should actually work. And we went on to make another couple of films. At the same time, I was appointed to the board of the Irish Film Board, which has been its own great learning curve, but also, yeah, I think there's a lot of kind of challenges and responsibility in that. And we also did this program called Screen Leaders, which was part of the Screen Training Ireland program. And really, I suppose what that is to do is to help creative companies or companies involved in the creative arena to be a bit more strategic about what they're doing. And so over the course of about 9 months, I would say, there was a couple of residential sessions, and then there was like individual one-on-ones where both myself and Kieran, but then we also brought in other key members of the team. And we really looked, I suppose, at both from a financial and a kind of creative side, our output, what we were making, what we were doing, how much of that was, you know, working for us on a financial level or on a creative level, because obviously there's always going to be, you know, different remits for different projects. And it was really, yeah, it was really instructive and useful for us to take that time out and try to be a bit more strategic about what we wanted to do as a company. And we also, yeah, set some goals for the company, and also it made it a lot easier doing that to say no to stuff and figure out, okay, well, what are the things that we don't do or are not interested in doing? Like, for example, we talked a lot about service producing, because that's, you know, one aspect of the industry in Ireland which can be incredibly lucrative. You know, there are some very big shows who come to Ireland and they shoot here, and you can facilitate the tax incentive and make a nice fee for doing that without having to do all the painful, torturous development work and the fundraising work. And while obviously that's a very good side of the business, and it's something that we would do if it comes to us, I suppose we made the decision, and certainly for me personally as well, it's like that's not necessarily why I got into the business. And so we will do that work, but we're not going to be spending a lot of our time really trying to pursue that, or because then it could be anything that we're trying to make. So Screen Leaders, I think, was very, very helpful for us to figure out the strategic goals for going forward. And then I suppose there's 3 films that I think are instrumental. Like there are 3 that are good illustrative of turning points in the company. The first one is The Queen of Ireland, which is something, it's just a film I'm incredibly proud of to have worked on. And I'm proud of it for a number of reasons. So one of our goals on Screen Leaders was to do a movie that was released by a studio, and Universal picked up the film. So it was a big thrill at the premiere whenever the Universal logo came up in front of the film. But more than that, I think it was just, this was an incredible time in Irish history, and Rory O'Neill in Panty is an incredible character, and we were entrusted with telling his story. How it came about, actually, which I suppose goes back to the relationships and what I talked about earlier on in terms of relationships and working with people across a long period, is Connor, who's the director there in the middle. That was the first day of shooting, actually, in 2010. Connor was the writer and director of 100 Mornings, and when we came home from Slam Dance, it was like, oh, what are we going to do next? You know, what's the plan? What ideas do you have? And again, as I said, features take a very long time. He had also directed some documentaries, and so we said, well, what about what about a documentary? And I had said, what about a documentary on Rory? And so we approached him, and he said to Conor, people have asked me before and I've always said no, but I know you're going to at least make me look pretty, because Conor's a good photographer as well, and he'd done all the Alternative Miss Ireland shots. So he let us embark on the story, and yeah, it's amazing to make something which you feel personally, I suppose, very proud of, that you feel is something that's going to last a very long time, but that also audiences found and they really, really connected with. So. And then the next one was a film called Love and Friendship, which was written and directed by a guy called Whit Stillman. Whit, myself and Kieran met at the Galway Film Fly, I think in 2010. And he was coming over to Ireland quite a bit because his daughter was in college here, actually, in Trinity. And I knew Whit from his previous work. His first film was called Metropolitan, which was nominated for an Academy Award for Best Original Screenplay, and then he'd done Last Days of Disco, and most recently Damsels in Distress. But anyway, we met, and he very cagily spoke about this project that he had, that potentially he might be interested in shooting in Ireland. And I knew he was meeting a number of production companies, and we just kind of tried to impress him. And then every time I went to New York after that, because that's where he was living at the time, I would just keep in touch with him, try and meet him for a cup of coffee or whatever, and go, try and find out a bit more about this mysterious, I think he'd said it was an Austin project, and that was about it. And then eventually in 2013, he, after I'd say I probably met him about 6 times, he eventually sent me the script and was like, okay, are you interested in maybe producing this? And I read it and I really loved it. And so I said yes. And initially, whenever he brought it to me, I kind of assumed that, he was like, maybe you can just do the Irish side. He kept saying, I've got American funders who will fund it, so I just need someone to kind of, run the Irish side and get everything together. But actually, it kept not advancing, I suppose. And after a little while, I said, well, do you want me to have a go? Like, maybe I can put it together in the European model, because at that stage he was living in Paris. So he was like, okay, go for it. And I brought on partners that I had met from doing previous courses again in France and the Netherlands, and brought on a sales company, and they launched it for Berlin. I think it was 2014. And then we were financing for a while, and we eventually shot it in February 2015, all in Ireland. And yeah, it was an amazing experience. Both the making of it was a big learning curve, and then also the finishing of it. I also got to be the inspiration for a scene for the first time in my life, and the story is probably doesn't reflect as well on me, because it was basically when we were, when you're shooting, by the way, it's like you're up at 6 o'clock in the morning and probably get home at about 10 o'clock at night. So your brain is not always on 100%. And we were talking about a scene one day, and I mentioned, oh yeah, that's the 12 Commandments scene, or the 12 Commandments or something. And Whit just exploded into laughter. And I was like, I know it's 10. And then he's like, that's absolutely hilarious. Can I use that? And I was like, okay, and then just continued on. And a couple of weeks later, these pages came through for a scene with the most foolish guy in the film talking about the 12 Commandments. So I am now mortalized, and that is very, satisfying for me and my old nuns that used to teach me, I guess. And the top right is to remind me of remembering thank you notes or thank you gifts. But actually, really, the story is about busyness and what's important. So basically, Stephen Fry was over to shoot on the film, but we only had him for 1 day shooting. And so he traveled in the day before, did all his costuming and a little rehearsal and stuff like that, went off, came in the following day. And when you're a producer, you kind of usually have a million things to do in a day. I often, at the end of a day, reflect back on what I have done and go, I can't believe that all that stuff passed my desk today. And anyway, my friend's mum had been unwell, and she's a massive Stephen Fry fan. And Tom had asked me, would you mind getting a book signed. And I was like, cool, no problem. Anyway, I hadn't managed to do it in the morning. And then I went off for the day doing my various jobs. I came back at about 4 o'clock thinking, we shoot till 7, so he's not going to be done yet. And I asked our second assistant director, and he was like, oh, he's finished already. He's in the makeup chair, he's leaving. And also Stephen Fry had just been married, maybe like a week or two before our shoot. Anyway, so I go onto the makeup truck with a bag in my hand with his book in it to be signed by him as a gift to somebody else. And I was like, Stephen, thank you so much for today. You're amazing. And he was like, oh, thank you. Oh, you shouldn't have. You shouldn't have. And then I was like, I didn't. And then I was mortified. And then he was mortified for assuming. And yeah, that was that. But he was very gracious. But I suppose the reason I put that there is actually one of the big learning curves that I've had across my career is recognizing the difference and making sure that you make time for the important but not urgent stuff. And that doesn't just, I don't just mean here in terms of like getting something signed, but it is, you know, it's about that strategy. It's about making time for your staff. It's about making time to read the scripts, all the stuff that it's very hard. And that honestly, I would say is my biggest challenge, like to this day. Like it definitely is the thing that I struggle with the most, but I'm really working on. It's an interesting thing working, you know, as a creative entrepreneur, as I guess Mari describes me. But I didn't have any training in business ever, really. And so you're kind of learning as you go in terms of managing and trying to grow a business at the same time as you're just like, I just want to be making the stuff and talking to everyone. So I think that that's been an interesting tension, but I do enjoy both sides. So what else? Oh yeah, and then Striking Out is the third, the third project that I would say has been quite instrumental and fundamental in terms of a progression in the company. And that was an ambition that we always had, but certainly it was something that I think we would say came much more strongly to the fore after doing Screen Leaders, that we were like, we want to have a home-produced television drama on RTE that we've developed, which was a hard thing to do in Ireland, particularly in the last few years, because their budgets have been cut so much, and they've been affected by they've been affected in RTE, and so there's probably only maybe 3, if we're lucky, aside from Fair City, dramas made every year. But we started developing that, probably took us about 4 years, and then we shot it last year and it aired in January. It was a 4 by 1 hour new legal show. And it did incredibly well for us, ratings wise. RTE were delighted, and we are in active development on a second series, so kind of hopeful for that. But I suppose the other reason I bring this up is that thing that I said about growth being so, that partnerships and collaboration and trusting other people is so important to that element of the business, because we can't grow unless I can become, or we couldn't grow unless I became a more effective delegator, I guess. And one of those courses that I did early on when I was kind of in my flux time in Treasure was the development executive traineeship myself. And one of the other people on that course was Yvonne Donoghue. At the time she was working for Element. And I remember being like, oh, she's really good. Like she's better at me at this development stuff. Like if I can ever hire someone full time, it'll be her. And thankfully about 4 years ago, we were in that fortunate position, and she was also available and up for coming to join us. And so she really spearheaded this. And so I have to just give a lot of credit to her. And it's great to see her prosper and develop as a producer. So, oh yeah, what's next? This is some things that we have kind of coming up or that I'm currently working on. On the left is Grace Jones, which has been my second collaboration with Sophie Fiennes. It is a really, really exciting project, and I still pinch myself that I'm working on it. And basically it's a feature documentary, a very intimate observational portrait of Grace Jones that then is kind of intercut with footage from a live performance, which we designed and staged and promoted in the Olympia Theatre in September last year. And I've never done anything like that before. We were like not only filming a show multi-camera on film, but we were also promoting the show. But it was completely exhilarating, and it's turning out really well. So we're excited for where that's going to go, and hopefully it's going to be coming out here in October. And then Vita and Virginia at the bottom right, it's a story of Virginia Woolf and Vita Sackville-West and their relationship, directed by a British director called Chania Button, which we plan to shoot here in late summer. And then Extraordinary is the Maeve Higgins slide up there. It's a debut feature, which is something that we've done a lot of, and you know they can be tough to do, but they're really, really rewarding. But anyway, it's a debut feature by Micah Hearn and Enda Lockman, who work under the name Daddy often. And it's their debut feature, and it's basically like a Ghostbusters in rural Ireland, but with really crap tiny hauntings and a love story. So that will hopefully be coming soon. And the other thing that I'm doing, I don't have a picture for it, but is my friend Sinead that I mentioned at the start as well, that she was doing the Masters in Film Production. She is also at the moment directing her first documentary feature film, which I'm exec producing, and that will be finished later this year as well. And so that's a nice synchronicity, I guess. It's good to be able to work with friends. And the other things, just I suppose to mention a little bit about, are where I see things going, and other work that I do in the industry. And part of that obviously is with the Irish Film Board. And one thing that's very dear to my heart, and I have to definitely thank Waking the Feminists for lighting a fire under a lot of people, is that we were involved in putting together a gender policy, a 6-point plan for the Irish Film Board in terms of what we can do to try and move towards a more equitable balance of male and female writers and directors in particular. That's where the biggest disparity is. And that's one piece of work, but I think that there's probably more that we need to do outside of gender, you know, in terms of other diversity issues within the film industry. And I think that and kind of lobbying and advocacy on those issues, but also on, you know, the government kind of really backing creativity as fundamental for Ireland and Ireland's development, are things that are very dear to my heart, and certainly things that I guess I develop in my career and get more profile, are things that I want to try and help to champion. So that is it, I think. That's us.
Thank you very much, Katie. That was fascinating, and it's wonderful to see that you've managed to work on something that you really feel passionate about, and also to bring your own personal politics and principles into that. Very, very wonderful. So does anybody have any questions?
I think you'd probably be more useful as a Minister for Arts, but do you think you would go into directing?
Directing?
Yeah.
No, I don't think so. No.
Not your thing.
No. I don't, there's other people that are so amazing at that. Like the visual side is the one thing that I certainly don't have. And I really recognize that as a very special skill in other people, but no, definitely not.
Okay, thanks, Katie. I was wondering how you feel about the kind of the new platforms that are out there in terms of distribution of films. So, you know, perhaps smaller films like Citadel, which I don't know if it got a theatrical release.
It did, yeah.
It did, but would have been a fairly small film all the same. Perhaps there's much more of a life now. Did you sell it to Netflix? Or?
We did actually. Yeah, no, Citadel did quite well. It had a theatrical release here and in the US, even though it was small, but it did a lot of sales. Probably the earlier slides, like 100 Mornings, Come on Eileen, Sensation, they were, and even, I mean, Sensation went into cinemas, but it's incredibly hard. People are challenged. There's so much on offer, I guess, for people. So to capture people's attention is very, very difficult. But like, for example, on Love and Friendship, that was released in the US by Amazon. Amazon bought it, and then they partnered with Roadside Attractions, who are a theatrical distributor for the cinema release. And actually, it was really interesting talking to them about their strategy and the level of detail and information that Amazon are able to impart to the distributor to help them kind of really target their marketing to areas where they know, you know, people here buy a lot of Jane Austen stuff, you know, and so there's an interesting thing there, but very often they can be slow at sharing that information with producers. Certainly Netflix hold it very close to their chest. But yeah, you can definitely, the means of getting your film out there, and the means of making your film more cheaply, that completely exists. It's there for anyone to make a film, but I think you have to, then try and capture your audience. But like, things recently like Young Offenders, that was made for a really low budget. And I know that they got excited about that very early. They had the distributor on very early, and they worked very hard to kind of build awareness of the film for quite a long time, and it paid off in dividends with the box office.
They had to change the name for Netflix.
The Young Offenders?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know, I hadn't heard.
No, they did. It has a different name.
No way. Wow,
Yeah.
I didn't see that. Yeah. Hi.
I think you talked a bit about sort of crafting a profile for Blinder and when you started to sort of have a vision, but I was wondering what those conversations look like and what you found yourself looking for.
Well, when we were doing screen leader stuff, I literally was looking back kind of when I was preparing this. We had boards, and there was this amazing woman called Bernie Cullinan who was kind of like a mentor, a facilitator, and so she gave us all these questions, and we kind of just sat around together and like worked a lot on what do we want to be known for, what do we want to be famous for, and goals, and then SWOTs, like doing a kind of strengths, weaknesses, all that stuff, and just kind of extrapolating from there, I guess. Yeah. But a lot of talking, and that's the stuff that it's really, I suppose, going back to the Stephen Fry thing, that's the stuff that it's really important to make time for, but it's always very hard to it can be really hard to find that time.
Anyone else?
Thanks so much, Katie. You mentioned that you were developing your business skills as you started off.
I basically would be calling my dad and going, what should I do here?
So what do you think are the big inefficiencies in the film sector? Well, you spoke a little bit about, some of the challenges you found individually, about making time for important but not urgent stuff. But what else, how else do you think as an industry there needs to be big improvements?
The thing is, I don't believe that there are big inefficiencies, but I do think what's really difficult is that what needs time and care and attention is not rewarded and is not paid for well enough. So I think like development is basically our R&D in the film industry, but very often, you're very limited in terms of where you can finance that, or you have to finance it yourselves. And it's so speculative that actually that's a challenging, it's a risky thing, to be doing. And so I think that's, I think it's fair to say that that's probably one of the biggest challenges for us, trying to make the space for that, both in personnel and in, finance. Yeah.
So can I just ask you a question? So if you have a script, how long would it take to go from the script to the finished?
Like it could be anything up to 7 years, even more sometimes. I don't know what the quickest one of ours has been. 4.
It's been minimum 5, hasn't it?
Yeah, 4 or 5. This is Kieran, by the way. Yeah.
Kieran, would you like to say anything? Yeah?
No, she did a brilliant job.
I've heard stories of 7, 8, I've heard 10 years.
Yeah.
I remember Pat Murphy was trying to make her film Nora, and I remember talking to her, and it was 10 years from the time she spoke to me about it to the time it was actually on screen.
Yeah.
And she had to make so many compromises in the script, and who she chose to be in the script to get big names in it.
Yeah.
That, it became, a question, was it worth it in the end?
Yeah.
So it's an incredibly challenging.
One of the ways that Whit described me, he did some interview and he described me as a terrier. I think that's like maybe slightly, no. He meant it massively as a compliment, and I took it as such. But I think definitely, I suppose, one of the skills that you need to have as a producer is tenacity, but also the ability to like kind of communicate, because you're working with a lot of talent on a lot of projects, and so that takes a lot. But I think you have to be the one who kind of can drive the drive the ship and keep them on course. And even if that, if it's delayed, it doesn't mean that a project ever dies, unless you decide. But yeah, things sometimes just find for their moment. There can be all kinds of reasons, market reasons, that you're not even necessarily that aware of early on, that people aren't kind of going into a project, and sometimes you just need to give that a little bit of time or adjust something. Yeah.
Ruth,
Can
again?
I ask another question?
Yeah.
It's about women in the film industry.
Yeah.
And how's it going to be solved? I know you're putting in place measures, and I know that from other, kind of similar debates have been out that women have slightly ended up going more towards documentary because you're more in control of your hours. There's less,
Yeah.
it's easier to have a kind of family.
It's definitely easier, yeah.
And I've also heard, it's said that budgets are lower, so people are kind of less concerned about how you're spending the money, and so they'll give it to a woman. But I just wondered, how you were responding to this and what you had kind of coming up.
You mean personally?
Well, actually, they're both you personally and in terms of your work with the board. Where you think the changes could be made that would facilitate more women entering the film industry as director writers.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was an interesting journey for me actually, because even when you look at the first slide of films that are ones that really stayed with me, they're all stories of men, they're not stories of women, and I feel like I had my own personal awakening. A few years ago, I was actually at Citadel with at South by Southwest with Citadel, and we had a press day, and I'd heard about this TV show called Girls, and they were doing a screening of a few of the episodes in South by, and I had said to Brian, who's my co-producer, would you mind if I didn't do the press thing? Can you look after it? I really want to go and see this thing. And so I got a ticket by myself, and I went up and I watched it, and I just was like, completely loved it, because there were just flawed characters that I could really identify with on screen for the first time. And I think it was the Galway Film Fleadh, the one following that I remember watching. There was a series of films, I'm not going to name them, but they were all stories about men, and I was just like, God, I just don't care. They're not interesting to me. And that's not to say obviously all films about men I'm not interested in, but it was some kind of an awakening in terms of the disparity, I suppose. But I mean, personally, and I think in Blinder Films, we have a really good balance of the directors and writers, across both genders. And in the film board, I mean, I think it was a really good first step, making a plan, putting it out there that we're conscious that this is a problem. And obviously the film board is an agency that can only that's reactive to what's submitted to it. So what we need to see is a big increase in the numbers of females applying, and that's up to writers and directors themselves, obviously, but it's also really up to production companies. And I think it was an important message to communicate that we're very serious about that, so production companies take that seriously. That's one step, and it is gradually increasing, but the line is like that, it's slow. And so there is the potential, and I was re-elected to the film board, so we literally just had our first meeting the day before yesterday, and it's something that's going to be on the agenda at the next meeting. But I know that we are saying potentially there will be other kind of stronger measures, and there's things that we're considering, but I can't speak about them yet. But I think intervention is important. Yeah.
Okay. Anybody else? Very quiet. I think that phase that you talked about, where you had to decide whether you were going to be a service company, or you're going to define your future. I think that's a really important part of your development. It's very impressive that you took that time, because a lot of people who are on the road to building a company can just get into earning money and not really think about what the longer picture is.
Yeah, no, we never did that, unfortunately. No, which I think. No, but it was actually interesting. Like when I joined. First, literally we were a desk leeching off the commercials company, which was doing incredibly well and had these lovely budgets to play with, and I ended up producing a couple of commercials while I was there. And while commercials for directors is a brilliant playground, because you get all your toys and you can really exercise your creativity or try out shots. Like the guys from Daddy, anytime they do commercials now, they try out a shot for something that they want to do in their feature. It's amazing for directors, but for producers, it's like you have to deal with these agencies and care about the brand, and so that was a very early for me lesson. And I produced 2 commercials, and then I was like, you know what, that's just not, I don't want to do that. And so I suppose it was the same thing. And I wouldn't say it was a long time that we went into the service thing, but it seems like it's a smart play, but at the same time, if you just then spend your whole time trying to chase those jobs, it's taking you away from the other stuff.
Okay, and if no one else has a question? No?
What about,
Excuse me, the latecomer.
Congratulations on the Pepsi advert that you recently were
Thanks very much, Michael.
Is there a pressure for attracting so-called big names for financing, and sometimes where you feel you may be able to
have a breakthrough talent, but financiers are like, we need a name attached, we need a name attached.
Yeah, it's literally like at the moment there's that you can always tend to get to a certain point with your financing, and then there's always a gap, and that gap has to usually be filled by the market, and that's where those questions come in. It's and I understand it from their point of view, because they're also going, well, we need to find ways to, get this out into the market and make it a safer bet, get distributors to buy it, because there's so much content out there that people can, consider. So there is a pressure, but then at the same time, known names can often be also really incredible actors, and why wouldn't you want them in a project, and why wouldn't you want them there to help bring audiences to the film too? But it's just it can be difficult. I think hopefully, the more films that you make, the reputation that you build, those kind of conversations and access gets a little bit easier. Fingers crossed.
Yeah, maybe like Game of Thrones has kind of changed that quite a lot in the TV.
In terms of Irish and Northern Irish.
And you start with unknowns and build
Yeah.
them into, all of them really were
Yeah.
partly.
Okay, well, it sounds to me that you're an incredibly organised person, because to achieve everything that you have done it must require a lot of planning.
It's a lot of I don't know if it's planning. I find sometimes I can be a bit too reactive. I don't know if my mum and dad would say that I'm a very organised person, having seen my bedroom when I was a teenager. And yeah, probably one of the best moves I ever made was the first film we produced, 100 Mornings. It was actually shooting like 15 minutes from my house. So rather than commute to Dublin every day, I was like, I'm just going to stay at home. And having been like a teenager, even going into my 20s, someone who slept a lot, slept very late. When I was making that film, I was literally gone at 6 o'clock in the morning and home at 10 o'clock at night. So now I think I have a free pass for everything in the rest of my life. But yeah, I have to-do lists. But I think also a big thing for me was, it's still a challenge, is communication and delegation. And I'm definitely getting better at it.
Right. And you must also have an amazing Rolodex and contacts. That's the industry.
Yeah.
Who you know.
Yeah, it really does. Yeah, it's true. Very true.
Well, we leave it at that, and thanks very much for coming. That ominous bell outside is beckoning the students to their exams.
Ugh.
So next week, 2 weeks' time is the last lecture in this series, and it's by Emily Robin Archer, and so that's in 2 weeks' time. And I am working on a third series for next year, so I'll let you know about that. But thanks for your support, and hopefully I'll see you in 2 weeks' time.